Now, we've talked about progressivism at the local level, the municipal level, and at the state level. But as they focused more on economic and social matters, progressives simultaneously sought to increase their influence in national politics, reasoning that certain big problems demanded national solutions. No patchwork of state regulations could control the trust or protect consumers, and state and federal courts were often hostile to reform. So a national progressive movement could pass laws less vulnerable to judicial review, and/or a progressive president could appoint progressive-minded judges. Now, national leadership could not emerge from Congress. The Democrats in Congress were divided between the very radical Bryanites, the followers of William Jennings Bryan, and the very conservative followers of Grover Cleveland. And the Democrats, after 1896, that disastrous election, were unable even to speak with one voice on economic and social policy. They seemed incapable of winning a national election or offering a national agenda. The Republican Party was more popular, but it was controlled by the conservative old guard, led by Senator Nelson Aldrich of Rhode Island and the Speaker of the House, Joseph Cannon of Illinois. Uncle Joe, he was referred to as. Cannon was closely tied to Mark Hanna, that state boss in Ohio, and other industrialists. These forces were anti-progressive. This old guard viewed Robert La Follette as a dangerous radical when he arrived in the Senate in 1907. National progressive leadership came from the executive rather than the legislative branch, therefore, from Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson in particular. These men profoundly altered both America and the American presidency. Republican bosses chose Teddy Roosevelt to be McKinley's running mate in 1900, not to elevate him, but to remove him from New York state politics, where as a moderate reform governor, his initiatives pitted him against the party machine led by the stalwart Thomas C. Platt. The old guard was not concerned about Teddy Roosevelt making trouble as vice president. It was a do-nothing job, and McKinley was a young, vigorous politician in control of his party and his presidency. Less than 1 year into his term, however, McKinley was shot by an anarchist assassin and died 9 days later. Teddy Roosevelt was sworn in at age 42, the youngest ever president of the United States. He was born into an aristocratic family. Teddy Roosevelt nevertheless developed an uncommon affection for, quote-unquote, the people. He was very sickly in youth, and he had remade himself into a vigorous adult, engaging in adventures like dude ranching, African big game hunting, and actual combat. Part of his attraction as the vice presidential running mate was he was a war hero from the Spanish-American War, which occurred in 1898. More about that soon. He was a voracious reader, an accomplished writer, and he appeared aggressive and swaggering and like an overgrown boy in his public rhetoric. But in private, TR could be a skilled and patient negotiator. And again, he was incredibly well-read and a very good writer. He was an imperialist, confident of the superiority of English-speaking peoples, but he nevertheless appointed people of quote-unquote inferior races to his administration. TR quickly showed a flair for the dramatic, ordering his Justice Department to prosecute the Northern Securities Company. This was a $400 million monopoly set up by the leading financiers and railroad tycoons to control all railroad lines in the Northwest, from Chicago to Washington State. Never before had an American president sought to use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up a monopoly, which is funny because that's what it was supposed to do. A shocked J.P. Morgan, who headed this deal, rushed to the White House to offer to fix things, but TR would have none of it. In 1903, a federal court ordered Northern Securities to break up into separate companies, and the Supreme Court upheld the decision a year later. And TR was hailed as a trust buster. In reality, TR did not oppose great industrial concentration. He felt it had brought America great wealth. He simply felt that government should regulate these behemoths to protect disadvantaged citizens in their dealings with industry. This new role would require a bigger, stronger government to sort of offset industry. This would be the centerpiece of a program TR would later call the New Nationalism. This lithograph here depicts the investors that controlling the Northern Securities Trust. You see J.P. Morgan there, but Vanderbilt's there, Rockefeller's there, all the great men of the day. So TR's victory in the Northern Securities Company decision was a big deal. TR displayed his willingness to use government power to help the weak when he involved himself in a coal miner strike in 1902. Miners in the coal fields of eastern Pennsylvania wanted recognition for their union, the United Mine Workers Union, which is still an important union today. They also wanted a 10 to 20% wage hike in an 8-hour day. When their employers, led by George Baer of the Reading Railroad, refused, they went on strike. In October, the 5th month of the strike, TR summoned the mine owners and the UMW president John Mitchell to the White House. Now, Baer expected Teddy Roosevelt to threaten the miners with arrest by federal troops. That's what the president always did. Instead, he supported Mitchell's request for arbitration and told the owners that if they refused, that troops would seize the mine from them and operate it on behalf of the government. The stunned owners agreed, and the miners got a 10% increase in a 9-hour day. Compromise prevailed. The federal government had never ordered employers to negotiate with their workers, and TR enjoyed a huge surge in support from ordinary Americans. We see him here on the left with a miner. He also raised the hopes of African Americans when he invited Booker T. Washington to dine in the White House. See that commemorated here on the right. It was very controversial because it violated Southern segregational ideals. In his 1904 election campaign, Teddy Roosevelt will run for election in his own right. He promised every American a square deal, and the slogan resonated, and Teddy Roosevelt won 57% of the popular vote. That's a huge win. To the surprise of many, TR had successfully aligned the Republican Party with reform. TR felt emboldened by his victory and moved to extend government regulation of the economy. His most important proposal was to regulate railroad rates and prevent discriminatory pricing. Theoretically, the Interstate Commerce Commission already did this, but the courts had weakened the ICC's oversight. So in 1906, Congress passed the Hepburn Act, which significantly increased the ICC's powers of rate review and enforcement. TR also supported and signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, passed by Congress in the same year. This act protected the public from fraudulently marketed and dangerous foods and medications. You could basically sell anything and call it medicine, and this prevented that. The uproar over Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle in 1906 prompted Teddy Roosevelt to order a government investigation of the meatpacking industry, and this led to the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 to regulate meat production. TR also did more than any previous president to extend federal control over the nation's physical environment. He was not a preservationist who believed the environment should be protected, set aside from all human interference. He believed the wilderness should be viewed as a place to live strenuously, to test oneself against nature. He believed a lot could be learned from the western wilderness. And to preserve the West, TR created 5 new national parks, 16 national monuments, and 53 wildlife preserves. The work of his administration led directly to the formation of the National Park Service in 1916. It wasn't created in his administration, but it was a direct outgrowth of work in his administration. TR was a strong supporter of the conservationist movement, which sought to ensure the nation's resources were put to the most efficient use for economic development. We don't want to lock it away. We want to use it, but we want to use it appropriately and conservatively. TR and the conservationists believed the plundering of western timberlands, grazing areas, and water resources and minerals had reached crisis proportions. So in 1903, Teddy Roosevelt appointed a public land commission to survey public lands, inventory them, and establish permit systems to regulate all kinds of users. TR favored hiring university-trained bureaucrats to manage these efforts rather than politicians. Here we see progressive efficiency at work. And there's a guy named Gifford Pinchot, a forestry management expert and a friend of Teddy Roosevelt's, who headed these efforts. This newly created National Forestry Service, under Pinchot's control, implemented a competitive bidding system for the right to harvest timber on national lands. User fees were also obtained from livestock ranchers who formerly grazed public lands for free. Now, the Republican Old Guard disliked these initiatives. When Teddy Roosevelt recommended prosecution for cattlemen and lumbermen who used federal land for private gain, they struck back with legislation in 1907 that curtailed the president's power to create new government land reserves. TR responded by seizing 17 million acres of land for preservation before the law went into effect. Many Republicans deplored this socialist-looking move, but to millions of Americans, TR was a man who stood up to cattle barons, mining tycoons, and other malefactors of great wealth.